Hello, and very warm welcome to a lecture on three-dimensional cities and urban underground space. My name is Nikolai Bobylev. I work as Associate Professor at the Institute of Earth Sciences at St. Petersburg State University. Today, our lecture will consist of three thematic blocks. The first one is urbanization and cities, their development strategies. The second one is on urban underground space and urban underground infrastructure. The first one would involve monitoring and policy development for urban development strategies and specific tools for reporting on development progress, including the progress on United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the first thematic block consists of several important items. The first one would be on urbanization and global environmental change, some basic statistics on urbanization, and then we move to type of cities which cities would like to imagine themselves currently, like sustainable, smart cities. In the second thematic block on underground space, we will focus on subsurface in an urban context. We will talk about resources of urban underground space, urban underground infrastructure, and how urban underground space and the city's third dimension would impact urban sustainability and resilience and development in general. The third theme would be very practically oriented and will tell us how to implement urban three-dimensional strategies, what is importance of those strategies. And it will also involve reporting and methodologies on measuring progress in urban development, and most notably a special instrument, voluntary local review for reporting on United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So now we move to the first thematic block. This is on urbanization and cities development strategies. So here we will talk about contemporary global challenges, which are, of course, global population growth and urbanization. I should say that urban growth, urban expansion happens faster than population growth. Even in countries where population is shrinking, urban growth, urbanization is observed. So in general, urban expansion exceeds population growth by several percent. And this trend is relevant to developing countries as well as developed countries. So if we talk about general policy, which is internationally agreed that we should prevent unjustified urban growth and greenfield development, we should recognize that this is not yet what is happening on our planet. So urban sustainability and compact urban development is a big challenge. So we will focus on this issue during our today's lecture. Another global challenges which planet Earth is facing is, of course, changing in our environment, including climate change and biodiversity loss. Those things are connected with urbanization in several ways. First of all, urban communities are communities where a majority of the world's population is living now, more than 50%. The milestone has been passed just recently. And secondly, due to big densities, quality of life in urban environment is challenging in most cities and megacities. So cities represent a problem on the global scale, but a solution at the same time. So urban areas and cities, megacities, are very important in addressing global environmental and development agenda. A little bit of statistics. So according to projections, by 2035, 2/3 of the world population will be living in cities. Cities account for 90% of the world's population growth and 75% of the energy consumption. The last figure is important and very much connected to three-dimensional cities, because if we can create compact urban infrastructure, we can increase energy efficiency, and that would result, of course, in less emissions and cumulative effects on combating climate change, for instance. As I already mentioned, that aerial growth of cities exceeds their population growth, which I see as a big challenge. So now we are moved to the names which cities like to call themselves, so-called buzzwords in urban development policies. Those buzzwords we can hear in media quite often from presidents and city governments. So I will just list now on this slide the most popular city names or their development strategy, terminology and approaches to urban development. We have, of course, sustainable cities, resilient, environmentally friendly, compact cities, smart cities, which are very popular now, climate neutral cities, the term which gains popularity, age-friendly cities, inclusive cities, and sponge cities. This is a very specific term for cities which are located in the areas where torrential rains are often, and therefore they are prone to flooding. And so urban natural and artificial infrastructures should absorb excess of water to prevent flooding. So we move on to explain all these city names or city buzzwords, and we explain in detail what is meant by each city type. So we start with a sustainable city. I think it is quite easy and very understandable that sustainable is aligned with United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, and currently we have development agenda until the year 2030, as agreed by all the nations via United Nations. And Agenda 2030 is represented by the 17th Sustainable Development Goals. You now can see them on their slides. Of course, the goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, are most relevant to urbanization. But here you see that actually all the goals are connected thematically, and while achieving the progress in one goal, we can most definitely have some cumulative impacts and achieve other goals as well. So you can see that if we improve life of urban citizens, we create jobs, we care about healthcare, individual and healthy environment, we of course would contribute to achievement of other goals such as poverty reduction and industry and innovation. Of course, some goals are very closely linked. For example, goal 11 and a goal on combating climate change, and as well on terrestrial ecosystems. But this is also a little bit depend upon the cities and countries' development stage and also their geographical location. So for some cities and megacities, goal on life in water, on oceans, would be very relevant. So for others, life on land would be much more relevant. We move to another type of city. This is a resilient city. I will expand a little bit on the terms resilience and sustainability. They are different. I know that in many instances, people and high-level policymakers would like to put comma between these two words. Our city is sustainable and resilient. This sounds nice, but it is a conflict between these two concepts. While sustainability means that we are saving resources for the future, and the future generations would in theory have the same resources and as we do and can use the same resources. This is, of course, the motto, the main idea of sustainability. So sustainability is all about future, while resilience is all about now. Resilience is about adapting and withstanding extreme technological or natural events such as torrential rainfall, flooding, strong winds, or high temperature. Now, climate change manifests itself predominantly in the high frequency of extreme weather events. So while sustainability is about future, resilience is about now. And here you see a good example. This is Tokyo, Japan, GCAN's system. This is a temporary water storage tank or reservoir. You see it is huge. And these structures are common in Asia. You can find them in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, and many other cities. Structures of a less scale are also common now in Europe and in the United States, where torrential rains also happened, and we saw huge flooding across the globe actually in recent years. But in Asia, it's also very much related to climate. So in a way, they were in the forefront of creating resilient cities using this artificial infrastructure, which is all underground and all made of concrete. And concrete is very carbon-intensive material. So if you create those structures and you need them for adapting now to climate change, to creating resilient cities, sustainability is, of course, in question, because where we have a natural environment with ecosystems, with forests and wetlands that can absorb excessive water, in urban context, we do not have those opportunities. So we have to create this structure. But sustainability is in question. Those structures are usually used just several days or even several hours a year. We move to another type of city, which is environmentally friendly city. And here I would like to focus on another term, which is nature-based solution, and the second term is environmental planning. This is how we could reconcile the previous two concepts and conflict between them, sustainability and resilience. So what would be solutions? Nature-based solutions could be one of the solutions, and achieved via environmental planning it is even better. And here are reports by World Bank and by the United Nations Environmental Program, Geo6, and specific part Geo on cities, which would serve a good reference for how cities can be more environmentally friendly and how natural and nature-based technologies can be used to address urban challenges. Here is a picture in Berlin. It is a beautiful lake, but it is actually not a lake, but it is a roof of intensively used transport tunnel. And I think this is a good illustration of many things which we are touching today in our lecture. So first, of all, it is of course about urban underground space, because infrastructure is underground. The second is about environmentally friendly city and creating comfortable urban environment, sustainable and resilient actually, and environmentally friendly. The problem is that it is of course quite expensive, and not all the cities and countries can afford it. But I think this is a good practice, and it is of course practice on three-dimensional city. The next buzzword which I'd like to explain is smart city. In recent years, many cities would like, almost every city would like to call them a smart city. Smart city is about using information and communication technologies to address urban development agenda. Here are two examples. First of all, Moscow markets itself as a smart city, and Moscow development strategy is called Smart City 2030. The second one is a joint effort by United Nations agencies led by International Telecommunication Union on smart and sustainable cities, where the best practices of using information and communication technologies are compiled and discussed and further development. It is not only about technology, but it is also about cities, because citizens should be ready for use those technologies in urban development. But I think many of us are now quite comfortable in scheduling doctor appointments online, kind of comfortable to use car sharing, using mobile phones, to use different urban services. Although progress is different in different countries, and we will talk later about inclusive city and city comfortable for all the ages, I think we should not be forgetting that while moving towards smartness and greater use of information and communication technologies, we also should provide the room for majority of citizens that they would feel comfortable in their city. And we have, of course, citizens with different age and different physical abilities. That is an agenda for inclusive city, and it is also quite important in my view. But those will be next city words. Now is carbon neutral city. Carbon neutral city is quite popular, and the best, most advanced, and I would say the richest city published climate plans. The most famous network for climate plans is C40 cities. In the Russian Federation, we have a federal law or directive which encourages or requires all cities to develop climate adaptation plans. So carbon accounting in urban development is now gaining traction, and it is again important item on urban development agenda. Here you saw example of the Copenhagen climate plan, and here you see some examples of what would it mean carbon neutrality. For example, here in Tromsø, Norway, we see pavements which are heated, and heating payments can be achieved by several ways. One of the options is shallow geothermal exchange. Another option is electricity, which can come from renewable sources. Another option is excessive heat from power plants. So that technologies will all be relevant to carbon neutrality. Another example from Berlin, it's the University of Berlin. You can see here roofs, green roofs, which absorb heat in summer, and also solar panels, which of course create renewable energy. Sustainable mobility is an important component of climate neutrality. So how do you make urban environment comfortable for bicycles, that people are encouraged not to use their private car? So here is an example from Sweden, where the pump for bicycle tires is installed and free to use. So we are moving to the next term, which is age-friendly cities. As I said, it's very related to inclusive city, but inclusive is much wider. Age-friendly also have some very concrete things. For example, children who has quite lower height than adults can inhale much more heavy particles from air pollution, so-called PM5 or 10 particles. So I think this also needed to be reflected in urban planning, as well as elderly citizens who need barrier-free space. So planning a city for different ages is important as well on urban development agenda, as sustainability, as climate neutrality, as resilience. I think all these things are important. Inclusive city, very relevant to developing countries as well as developed countries. So here you can see example of the luxury hotel and poverty just across the fence. I think globally we would like to avoid these situations as much as possible and not forgetting all citizens in moving towards urban prosperity. Compact city is an internationally agreed urban development strategies which can be realized in several ways. In general, compact is very good because we limit urban expansions. We save space for agriculture and biodiversity. On the other hand, quality of life is not always of a high standard in a compact city. So here you can see rather two challenging examples is Ankara and Hong Kong, especially Hong Kong, all the districts where quality of life is challenging. But later on we see some excellent strategies and excellent objects for urban development, for compact urban development, including and addressing sustainability and resilience and inclusive city and smart city and all possible urban development strategies. Now we move to the theme number 2 in our today's lecture, which is urban underground space and the three-dimensional city. So here on the model you can see cities which we are talking about if we are mentioning underground space. These cities use underground space, they discuss underground space, they plan underground space. So these are important cities on three-dimensional planning and urban underground space. Those are pioneering cities, not always excellent examples of three-dimensional infrastructure on underground space use. But of course, these are the cities which accumulated a lot of knowledge on three-dimensional development. Now, important slide, where I explain what do we mean by urban underground space. Urban underground space is everything below daytime line, below subsurface. And so underground space consists of 4 main resources in an urban context. We do not touch upon oil and gas and materials which we excavate. In an urban context, we focus on other things like space for infrastructure, natural and artificial caves, of course, transport infrastructure, underground or subway or metro, the most well-known example perhaps. We focus on energy, on geothermal energy and also shallow heat exchange, where we can temporarily store energy in underground space. We focus on geomaterials while we excavate underground space for infrastructure. We can use remaining geomaterials, not always, but we should at least dispose them somehow, which can be challenging in certain contexts. And the fourth use of underground space is groundwater, which we can use for drinking. We again can use it as a substance to carry energy, and groundwater also provides a very important source of nutrition for ecosystem and very important source of stability for infrastructure. So fluctuation of groundwater level should be carefully monitored in cities. So these are 4 main resources. And on the slide, you can see a concept of how do we use underground space. This concept is based on Geosystem Services approach, which is talking to ecosystem services approach, which is much more famous. But ecosystem services would include biotic part of the environment, living organisms, while geosystem services is focusing on abiotic component, which include geodiversity. So this concept would be much more relevant to urban underground space use because we don't have many living organisms there. However, urban underground space is very important for artificial environment and for natural ecosystems. So importance means that we need to consider underground space and we need to plan it during urban development. A little bit of statistics. What is in urban underground space? How do we use it? So here you see a case study of urban underground space used by function. So you see that transport function, including urban rail and automobile tunnels, are predominant function, and utilities, sewage, water and gas is also quite important and can be found in all the cities, but this is a relatively small percent. Cities who are advanced in using underground space would have more diverse function for using subsurface. Distribution of artificial underground infrastructure in underground space. So here you see that the near surface layer of underground space is the most crowded ones. So here we have all the cables, conduits, and further, while we move deeper, while we move further underground, you see underground space is less used. In the urban context, the problem is if you want to build underground line, of course, you need to have a connection with the surface, and connection is very crowded already with infrastructure. So this is one of the challenges in intensive use of underground space. Here you see a slide which is relevant very much to urban development indicators, urban environmental indicators. When I studied urban underground indicators, I was surprised and shocked that there is nothing on the third dimension, nothing on underground space. So I suggest there's several indicators, namely density of use of underground space and also underground space use volume per person, which can be used on a par with all other urban development indicators such as population densities, daytime density, nighttime density, and so on. Some urban indicators are very advanced and elaborated. Green areas, density of dwelling units, for example. So underground space is moving towards be an integral part of urban development and planning process. And of course, statistics are very important in this regard. So now let us talk about main stories. What does it mean using underground space now in cities and megacities? We start with geothermal energy. I think many of you have heard about urban heat island. We mean above ground heat island, where because of black surfaces, we have an intensive energy use, including automobile engines. We have temperature in the city centers sometimes several degrees, up to 6-7 degrees higher than in urban suburbs or in adjacent area. The same things happening underground. So in underground space, we also have urban heat island, which can be in conflict with use of geothermal energy or use of soils and rocks for temporarily storing energy. For example, if your neighbor already storing some energy and underground space is heated, then you would have less capacity for cooling your computer service, for example, underground. We move next to urban development concepts and planning of underground space. And these two pictures have a time span of 100 years. So ideas for urban underground space planning, you see here French pioneering architect Eugene Hennard, which proposed his concepts, which were not that welcomed in his motherland in France, but he at least tried to develop plans for London, which again were not realized. However, you see in Hong Kong, hundreds of years later, they are doing exactly this. They are redeveloping waterfront, embankment, and they are putting several layers of infrastructure, including public rail, including parking space, including motor transport tunnel, including energy service infrastructure, several layers of underground space. And above ground will be a recreational area with beautiful water trans and trees where citizens can walk and enjoy. I think that would constitute good practice for using urban underground space. So this is how it all started. It started, of course, many hundreds of years ago with some caves and with some secret passages in medieval cities, but modern, intensively used underground space, intensive infrastructure, we see it predominantly as a transport infrastructure. And here you see examples of how London Tube was constructed. Initially, steam engines were used, so urban underground space made quite a way in terms of technology, in terms of planning, and in terms of conceptual use of the underground space in urban context. I would repeat myself that now we see underground not only the space for infrastructure, but also the space where we can gain energy and important environmental resource for groundwater. This usage of underground space can be in conflict, and we should take care of this and address those conflicts during planning. So many more interesting things underground. Here you see a picture from a museum where they excavated spy tunnel underground under Berlin Wall. I was already mentioning secret passages from castles in medieval cities. But underground space is highly used and very sophisticated technological field. So pioneering technologies has always been in underground space. The first picture you see here is Brunel tunnel, first automative, semi-automative tunneling, and then you see modern type tunneling boring machines. And then the most recent innovation in underground space is, of course, the idea by entrepreneur Elon Musk to use transport tunnels for high-speed individual car movement. So you can see here Tesla car, and Elon Musk several years ago announced a competition for machine to build tunnels, so-called boring company, and it's also talked very much to the fact that sometimes underground space is boring for engineers, but it is not boring at all, I think. And many universities took part in this competition, which was called to beat a snail, because now tunneling is quite slow. It is less than 1 meter a day this huge TBM can pass. So the challenge was to increase the speed of automated tunneling, which is still remains a challenge. So underground space is highly innovative and highly used field with a variety of technological advances, includes of mechanical advances, lights, guidance for GPS, smart things, and so on. Now this series of slides is a little bit more architecture and design. I just want to show you the best examples of underground infrastructure, how you use natural and artificial lights in urban environment, how you create comfortable space for urban environment. I think many of us has been in some kind of small underground passages where you can want to get out as soon as possible, but modern underground space doesn't look like that, and best practices include very comfortable spaces where people would like to stay for quite some time. The slide would address another function, important function of urban underground space, which is resilience and creating emergency response facilities for urban environments, specifically in historic cities. In historic cities all over the world, historically we had special units for fire brigade, but we never had any special units for ambulance services. And here you see two examples from London and St. Petersburg, where there are no facilities to park ambulances. And this ingredient is in need for more public services, public safety, urban resilience. How do you install all these necessary facilities in historic cities where you cannot touch anything above ground, and sometimes opportunities for touching underground space are also quite limited, but still there are some opportunities, and developing resilience and emergency response infrastructure is very important issue for planning and development of urban underground space. Transport infrastructure above ground, you see that in most times, in most instances, it doesn't really look nice, like these two examples from Japan. So what we want to do, ideally, with three-dimensional cities and with underground space, we want to create pleasant urban environment for living and recreation above ground. And all the urban functions and facilities that do not require daylight, we put them underground. This is example of separation transport streams, which has been done in Tokyo, Shiodome. I think it is a very good example for three-dimensional planning and using several layers of infrastructure. An example from St. Petersburg, where it has not been done yet, you see that there's only one dimension, and pedestrians, cars, and urban rail is all on one level, while using three-dimensional planning in underground space, we can separate infrastructure in levels and creating designated levels for each type of infrastructure. So you can see monorail above, and then pedestrian zone and zone for cars. And if we move further down, then it would be a metro line and some shopping facilities. And all is linked architecturally and functionally with open space. I think this is good practices for developing underground space. Now we move to the theme number 3 of our lectures, is policies, strategies, and methodologies for implementing and monitoring of urban development. How do we realize all these concepts of sustainability and resilience, smart cities, three-dimensional cities? What we can do, what urban governments can do? Here we have some advances, and we can distinguish several levels of policy interventions, which are international, national, and local. And I will briefly touch upon them, what is knowledge is available, what methodological bases are available to help urban citizens, planners, developers, policymakers to understand how to create the best city, most comfortable city for its citizens. So at international level, I would mention two major knowledge hubs. The first one, of course, United Nations and United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, which publishes World Cities Report, which I'm very proud to be part of, and United Nations Environmental Program, which publishes specific geo reports and specific section of this report on geo in cities, where we talk in detail about how to create, and most importantly, how to monitor and what are the goals for comfortable urban environment. So if we move to a national level, I have no opportunity during this lecture to single out some examples of some national strategies. They are, of course, very elaborate in each country, but I would rather give reference to national review which each country publishes on implementation of sustainable development goals. And here you can see an example from Russian Federation. So where statistics is combined using the themes of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If we move to local level, which is of course most interesting to us because it is city and regional level, so all major cities would have some development strategies which would address all the issues I mentioned in my lecture, sustainability, resilience, innovation, three-dimensional cities to some extent, environmental component usually to a great extent, and to some extent climate adaptation. So it depends upon how advanced the city and city government is. So for example, for St. Petersburg, we have a strategy for socioeconomic development, where you could see main thematic blocks of what is urban development policy. Here I'd like to focus on specific mechanisms for monitoring urban development, which is voluntary local review, which is of course very much relevant to the theme of our today's lecture, to the things I was talking about urban development strategies and also three-dimensional urban planning. So voluntary local reviews focus on cities and regions and monitors development in cities and regions through the prism of 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Here you can see that many cities and regions already had created voluntary local reviews. To date, there are 214 and counting voluntary local reviews available, where cities are focusing on specific issues of their development. So this mechanism talks very much to urban development strategies, but it is also different because city plan or development strategy, which is very much relevant to the specific country, to national level, while voluntary local review is comparable and relevant internationally. So you can compare cities in different countries. So here we see the guidelines for developing voluntary local reviews. This talks very much to the guidelines on monitoring urban progress, urban development indicators, including three-dimensional planning and urban underground space developing indicators. To some extent, most advanced cities would have mention of those, as well as climate strategies. So here you can see one of the tools for measuring programs towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals with voluntary local reviews, or territorialization, localization of Sustainable Development Goals. So this is an example provided by OECD, and I picked up several cities in Russia and Russia in general. I think other international organizations such as BRICS also should develop those kind of reviews using their specific indicators which are relevant to other groups of countries which are geographically or in a development stage which would constitute some important groups for comparison. I move to conclusions. Today we talked about urban development policies, and we were focusing on the third dimension, on urban underground space and urban underground infrastructure. And we established that if cities are to make progress in all these great things like sustainability and resilience and inclusive city, environmentally and age-friendly cities, cities to be compact, it is very important, it is indispensable to plan a city in three dimensions, including planning of underground space, which include many relevant and important environmental resources. To achieve progress in urban development, to achieve sustainable development goals, at least partially, I think it is quite important that we consider the third dimension of urbanization. Well-planned, compact three-dimensional cities with ample underground infrastructure and use of three-dimensional space score highly towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are the thoughts I would like to leave you with while concluding my lecture. I want to say that several further slides show some additional materials, including resources, publications, projects, and also online links for other media resources. Thank you very much.